These are the most interesting historical photos and unusual objects from the past. Let's get 100,000 subscribers. In 1946, a secret hooded group in Georgia staged a rite that put a child at the center. It shows how public shows and costumes were used to pass ideas to the next generation. In November 1942, a British guard stands watch over a wounded German officer in the desert. This scene came days after new landings that began to turn the North Africa campaign. These girls worked in a cotton mill in the early 1900s, their clothes speckled with lint from the machines. Images like this helped spark new rules that limited child work and hours. After liberation in 1944, some French towns cut the hair of women seen as close to occupying troops. Thousands faced this public ritual to mark shame and a break with the past. On 24 October 1901, Annie Edson Taylor became the first person to go over Niagara Falls in a barrel and live. She was 63, carried a small heart pillow for luck, and hoped the stunt would fund a calm retirement. In 1864, a wooden rail bridge lies shattered, its tracks hanging over a quiet river. Such wrecks slowed supply lines and pushed engineers to build quick new crossings. A long line of Aboriginal men march in linked iron collars, a stark system used in colonial Australia. The image shows how chains controlled travel and labor on the frontier. World War I medics treat wounded soldiers in a dugout near the front. The blank gaze is the 2,000-yard stare, a stress reaction later named in 1945. Crews lift a wooden house onto rollers and pull it with horse capstans to a new spot. Before hydraulic dollies and trucks, whole homes move through town at walking speed, sometimes for miles. A circus poster toots Mary, billed as the largest living land animal in the early 1900s. In 1916, a fatal parade incident led to her widely witnessed death, sparking calls to reform traveling animal shows. In 1961, a young border guard in East Berlin sprinted to the wire and leapt into West Berlin while the barrier was still only barbed wire. A passerby filmed the dash, and the image, "Jump to Freedom," became a symbol of a city split in two. In 1899, a Selknam family from Tierra del Fuego was shown in traveling ethnographic exhibits. Crowds paid to look at indigenous people on display, a practice later condemned but preserved in photos and diaries. Children look over St. Lo in Normandy in 1944, a town hit so hard by air raids that people called it the capital of ruins. About 95% of its buildings were damaged or lost before the breakout from the beachheads. A group of black workers and children gather by a mill yard in the 19th century United States. The era saw court fights over freedom and how race was defined, shaping lives across the South. Miners crowd the DeKalb goldfields near Barberton in the 1880s, cutting ore by hand beside early crushers on the cliff. This rush drew thousands before the Witwatersrand boom of 1886 reshaped South African gold mining. Men lead sled dogs down a ladder from the ship Endurance during Ernest Shackleton's Antarctic expedition of 1914 to 1917. Soon the ice would grip the ship, and the crew would survive months on the floes before a daring rescue. In early 20th century Canada, a hunting party rests by a lake with their deer harvest hung in a row. Such long trips mixed food gathering and sport, and later pushed for seasons and limits to keep herds stable. Prohibition agents hose open beer barrels after a Hoboken raid in Newark on June 18, 1931. By the early 1930s, crackdowns like this could not stop hidden bars, and the ban ended in 1933. Steam shovels cut through a hill on 6th Avenue in Seattle in 1914, leaving houses hanging at the edge. The city moved millions of cubic yards of earth in these regrades, flattening steep streets and remaking the map. On April 18, 1906, a quake near magnitude 7.9 along the San Andreas Fault split streets like this. Fires burned for days and ruined about 4/5 of the city, reshaping modern San Francisco. Klondike miners stand knee-deep in mud, feeding a wooden sluice for gold around 1899. Boomtown tricks even included a fake telegraph that charged $5 to send messages home before the scheme ended. Men of the Volkssturm line up with armbands and old rifles on 21 October 1944. This home guard was formed late in the war from boys and older men, short on training and gear, and it suffered very high losses. Early 20th century New York policemen test portable traffic lights worn on the chest. These trials came before standard street signals and timed intersections shaped city driving. On May Day 1952 in Tokyo, protesters and police clashed during a huge labor rally just days after the occupation ended. The unrest, later called the May Day incident, brought many injuries and arrests. 4 bearers carry a closed palki, a hand-carried carriage used across India before cars and trains took over. Relay teams would swap at rest posts so travelers could cross long routes without stopping. During World War I, some units kept a tame fox as a mascot and even fitted it with a small harness. Armies also relied on pigeons for messages and dogs for rescue, with odd camp pets kept for morale. A woman climbs through a tangle of beams in a shattered city during the 1940s. Her steady look amid debris hints at the quiet couriers and helpers who kept daily life moving. Men haul riverboats by hand along a stone towpath, pulling the long lines while sails fight the current. In the 19th century, tens of thousands did this work from the Volga to the Yangtze until steam power replaced them. In November 1979, a Romanian oil tanker exploded after a collision at the mouth of the Bosphorus in Istanbul. The fire burned for weeks and left heavy oil on the sea and nearby shores. Constables and workers use a wooden ram to open a hole in a cottage wall during an eviction in Ireland in the late 1800s. Scenes like this in the Land War pushed rent reform and new land acts in the following decades. Soldiers dig silent tunnels under Messines Ridge in 1917, bracing the clay with timber. On 7 June, the hidden chambers they made set off a shock that was heard in London. A model tries an early salon hairdryer at the Olympia show in London around the 1930s. Warm air ran through metal tubes like fingers, a preview of modern hood dryers. In the early 1900s, a hooded fraternal group rode in public parades and even staged races, with horses draped to match the robes. These spectacles doubled as recruitment and publicity across parts of the United States. On April 28, 1988, an Aloha Airlines Boeing 737 lost a large section of its roof at 24,000 feet and still landed safely on Maui. The event led to stricter checks for metal fatigue on high-cycle jets and shaped aging aircraft rules. In 1903, a Paris paper showed a talk on alcohol at Fresnes Prison, with inmates kept in wooden stalls to maintain order. The prison opened in 1898 and used such talks as early steps toward rehabilitation. In 1947, Amsterdam, Ans van Dijk, stands on trial for reporting people in hiding during the occupation, including a family member. She received a death sentence, rare for a woman in the Netherlands, and her case still prompts debate about choices under pressure. The Call Building, one of the tallest in the West, stands in smoke after the San Francisco quake of 1906. Fires spread for days and remade the city skyline. On the Greenwich Street and 9th Avenue, elevated in early 1870, tiny steam cars replaced a failed cable plan on a very light track. Engines and coaches had to be extra light so the frail structure could carry them above the streets. On April 27, 1921 in New York, officials hauled wine barrels from a cellar at 38 Cherry Street under a court warrant. It was early Prohibition, a short era that ended in 1933 after hidden bars kept business alive. A First World War soldier poses in a shaggy sheepskin vest with puttees, cold weather gear used at the front. These heavy coats kept sentries and drivers warm in winter long before modern parkas. In 1906, breaker boys sit by chutes in a coal plant, picking slate from rushing rock for 10 hours a day. Images like this helped push early safety rules and child labor laws in the United States. Crowds pack a makeshift platform in Antwerp soon after World War I, a scene of strain and rebuilding. A year later, the city hosted the 1920 Olympics, a signal of recovery and resolve. In February 1945, Dresden's Baroque Center was smashed by night raids that created a firestorm. Tens of thousands were displaced, and rebuilding the old skyline took decades. In 1963 in Italy, students were placed under hypnosis and taught by audio to test learning. Researchers measured if lessons heard in trance improved recall versus normal study. Prisoners step on a treadwheel in 1895, each in a wooden stall, climbing in place for hours to power a mill or as discipline. Shifts were strict and could mean thousands of steps a day, a Victorian idea of labor as reform. In 1919, Walt Disney drove a Red Cross ambulance in France and filled it with quick sketches. In the same unit served Ray Kroc, who later built McDonald's. From 1904 to 1916, the Vanderbilt Cup drew huge crowds as cars raced on public roads at risky speeds. In 1908, George Robertson won in a locomobile, and the race spurred the Long Island Motor Parkway, one of the first roads built only for cars. Russian metalworkers in the 1880s hand-hammer copper halves for a deep-sea diving helmet. These helmets were riveted and glazed, then fed air from the surface through a hose for dives in rivers and ports. In 1885, people in German Southwest Africa used a small sail car to glide along desert tracks. With a steady wind, it beat walking and burned no fuel at all. In 1909, technicians at the Solovetsky Monastery run gauges and a generator for one of Russia's first small hydro plants. Built on the White Sea, it used moving water to light the remote island complex. In 1911, Bobby Leach went over Niagara Falls in a steel barrel and lived, though he spent months in hospital with broken jaw and kneecaps. He later toured with the barrel and told the story on stage. In 1945, a British medic sprays disinfectant on people just freed from the Bergen-Belsen camp. Disease control teams used delousing and DDT to stop typhus from spreading among survivors. In 1951, a young Marilyn Monroe rubs lotion on her legs beside a patio chair. Early studio shoots turned everyday moments like this into star-making images. Verdun, 1916. A dispatch rider pauses by the road while an observation balloon hangs over the lines. Balloons guided guns and scouts, and fast motorbikes carried urgent maps across the maze of roads. Vire, Normandy, after the summer of 1944 raids, about 95% of the town was destroyed. Rebuilding stretched into the 1950s and 1960s, and much of the old street plan vanished. Market Street after the April 18, 1906 San Francisco earthquake, when broken water mains let fires race for 3 days and crews blasted fire breaks with dynamite. The magnitude about 7.9 shock and the fires destroyed roughly 80% of the city and took about 3,000 lives. Studio portrait of 2 enslaved boys in oversized work clothes, circa 1860, likely made to show child labor under slavery to anti-slavery audiences. In 1860, about 4 million people were enslaved in the United States. Red Army soldiers examined the giant Columbus presentation globe left in the Reich Chancellery, the same type mocked by Chaplin in The Great Dictator in 1940. Built in the late 1930s for top offices and heavy like a small car, paratroopers dedicate a drop zone in 1965 to Dickie Chappelle, the trailblazing American photojournalist who parachuted with units and became the first female U.S. war correspondent to die on assignment. Her pearl earrings and combat helmet turned into icons of frontline reporting. USSR, 1980s. Inside a sobering-up station where police routinely held intoxicated citizens overnight. Fines were issued, showers were mandatory, and notes could follow you at work. Bruce Lee, Bolo Yeung, and a young Jackie Chan share a playful clash on a Hong Kong set in 1973. Chan was then a stuntman whom Lee once accidentally struck during a scene, a moment Chan says made the star remember his name for life. USSR 1970s Epiphany ice bathers, known as Morji, dive into a carved ice hole while bundled spectators watch in temperatures often below -10 degrees Celsius. Visitors from abroad were frequently shown this ritual, which Soviet media promoted as a display of national hardiness and health training. Rare photo of 4 thylacines, the striped marsupial predators once native to Tasmania and mainland Australia. The species disappeared after heavy hunting and habitat loss. The last confirmed one died at Hobart Zoo in 1936. Kuwait, 1991. Towering smoke columns from hundreds of oil wells ignited during Operation Desert Storm turned daylight to dusk and stained the sun red. Fire crews from 38 countries capped and extinguished over 600 wells in about 8 months. Los Angeles, 1938. Men wear sandwich boards reading, "I voted for ham and eggs, and I believe the banks." Nods to California's ham and eggs movement that proposed $30 every Thursday for citizens over 50 during the Great Depression. Los Angeles, June 1968. Former NFL star Rosie Greer stands behind Robert F. Kennedy at the Ambassador Hotel just after his California primary victory speech. Moments later, an attack occurred. Hanoi, December 1946. Members of the Tuve Women's Militia aligned with Ho Chi Minh Parade on the eve of Vietnam's nationwide resistance to colonial rule. Their ranks handled scouting, liaison, and frontline defense as the First Indochina War began. Police display seized outfits and weapons from the Black Legion in the mid-1930s. This short-lived offshoot of the Ku Klux Klan grew across the Midwest to thousands of members before prosecutions dismantled it by 1938. John McCain, shown during captivity, spent 5.5 years as a prisoner in North Vietnam from 1967 to 1973, surviving grave injuries and long stretches of solitary confinement. A Mexican federal soldier says goodbye to his daughter at a train station during the Mexican Revolution in 1915. Rail lines were the main way troops moved, so families often had only a few minutes on the platform for farewells. In 1979, FBI agent Robert Hansen was assigned to hunt a suspected Soviet mole. Secretly, he was the mole, passing U.S. secrets for decades until his arrest in 2001 and life in prison. In 1969, the Black Panther Party launched free breakfast programs across the United States, feeding thousands of children before school and inspiring similar efforts nationwide. Federal agents labeled the project a threat. In late 1944, French forces in Europe were reorganized, replacing many West African tirailleurs and support staff with metropolitan units, a policy nicknamed blanchiment or whitening. These African interpreters hand back their gear after sudden demobilization. An Ethiopian Jewish son carries his mother during Operation Solomon in 1991, the rapid airlift that relocated more than 14,000 Ethiopian Jews to Israel in just 36 hours. One El Al 747 set a world record with over 1,000 passengers on a single flight, with babies born mid-air. Marilyn Monroe on a beach break during the filming of Some Like It Hot in 1958 to 1959, captured in vivid Kodachrome. Beside her is longtime makeup artist Alan Whitey Snyder, the craftsman behind her signature glow. A homeless man in the sealed Warsaw Ghetto, German-occupied Poland, 1941. By then, over 400,000 people were confined to 3.4 square kilometers. Rations were a fraction of those outside the ghetto. Seattle School, circa 1881. A one-room schoolhouse where dozens of children of all ages gathered outside the simple wooden building in a forest clearing. Seattle was still a young logging town with fewer than 4,000 residents. Marilyn Monroe tests a short black wig during a 1960 wardrobe and screen test for Let's Make Love, trying a striking new look for director George Cukor. A typical British adult's weekly ration during World War II was tiny. About 3 ounces of bacon, 2 ounces each of butter, tea, cooking fat, jam, and sweets, 3 ounces of cheese, 8 ounces of sugar, 1 egg, and roughly half a pound of meat. A mounted NYPD officer clashes with an anti-Bund protester outside Madison Square Garden on February 20th, 1939. Inside, about 20,000 attended the German-American Bund rally, while tens of thousands protested outside, and over 100 arrests were recorded. Abolitionist Jonathan Walker was branded on his right palm with the letters SS after a Florida court convicted him in 1844 for aiding 7 enslaved people to flee. This daguerreotype was made in August 1845. Amanda America Dixon, 1849-1893, inherited her father's estate and became one of the wealthiest women in Georgia. Her 1887 court victory confirmed her inheritance rights despite social barriers, and she invested in property and education in Augusta. A West German Heimkehrer gathering in 1955, where families checked placards for news of relatives captured on the Eastern Front. This mother has just learned her son did not return. That same year, Chancellor Konrad Adenauer's Moscow talks secured the final release of many prisoners. World War I soldiers staged concert parties behind the lines, with men playing every role because women were not allowed near the front. These light-hearted reviews, wigs, improvised gowns, and dance numbers lifted morale after trench duty and packed huts with laughter. A Meccan merchant poses with a Circassian bondwoman, photographed in Mecca around 1887 to 1888, a rare window into late Ottoman Red Sea trade networks. Domestic servitude in the region, supplied via Caucasus and African routes, persisted into the 20th century and was officially abolished in Saudi Arabia in 1962. A young woman stands beside a mountain of worn shoes at a World War II camp. Each pair hints at a life paused, a silent record of countless journeys. A French paratrooper escorts 2 Algerian men with a rope during the Algerian War, 1954 to 1962. Such patrols searched mountain villages to control movement and collect information. Eartha Kitt teaches a dance class at the Harlem YMCA in New York, 1955. Her crisp steps blend African rhythm and modern stage moves, lighting up the room. A teacher helps a girl who cannot hear feel how the word fish is formed at a school in Sayre, Oklahoma, April 1917. This method used touch and lip reading to build clear speech. Jewish soldiers of the German army gather for a Yom Kippur service in 1915. About 100,000 Jewish men served in the German forces in World War I, and many earned the Iron Cross. Joseph, center without a helmet, refused an order to harm villagers in Yugoslavia in 1941. Such conscience in a unit at war was rare and often cost the resistor his life. A winged bull carving rises from the ruins of Nimrud near Nineveh, Iraq, in 1949, photographed by Agatha Christie. This treasure stood for nearly 3,000 years before its fall in 2015. Frances Farmer was a rising Hollywood star in the 1930s, known for bold roles and a fierce spirit. In the 1940s, her career fell amid legal trouble and long hospital stays, a story that still sparks debate about fame and care. Men stand behind bars at a Mexico City police station in 1935 after being detained for suspected same-sex relations. Mexico ended criminal penalties for this in 1871, yet morality rules still led to arrests and public shame. A Chinese cavalry soldier trains near a nuclear test in 1964, wearing a gas mask and carrying a rifle. The blast at Lop Nur marked the country's first atomic device and a new era in its defense. Workers rest on straw and old potato sacks in Belcross, North Carolina, July 1940. Many seasonal labor camps used makeshift bedding like this in the last years of the Great Depression. Women inspect uncut sheets of banknotes at the Canadian Banknote Company in Ottawa, 1957. Every note was checked by hand for tiny flaws before the sheets were cut and numbered. In 1949, a United States senator tried to stop popcorn sales in movie theaters. At the hearing, another senator gave out free popcorn, and the plan died. American soldiers man a machine gun inside a railway building at Château Thierry, France, 1918. This battle was one of the first major actions of United States forces in World War I. A Soviet pilot stands in heavy winter flight gear in 1939. The fur collar, layered suit, and mask kept aircrew warm and alert in unheated plains during deep cold. Engineers built a curved barrel called Krumlauf for the Sturmgewehr 44 so a soldier could aim around corners. At 30 or 45 degrees, it reached about 100 meters, but the barrel wore out after roughly 300 or 160 uses. A Japanese-American man cuts a farewell cake before leaving to join the United States Army from a Wyoming camp, March 31, 1944. Despite confinement of Japanese-American families, many served with honor, including the highly decorated 442 Regimental Combat Team. Winona Ryder sits with a spooky movie prop on the set of Beetlejuice in 1988. The film used clever puppets and makeup to build a wild afterlife world. Governor George Wallace stands in the schoolhouse door at the University of Alabama on June 11, 1963, trying to stop integration. Federal authority ordered him aside, and 2 students enrolled that day. A young woman looks at the camera as men tie their bags to the car during a stop in North Carolina, 1940. They were part of a flow of travelers moving from Florida to New York for work and a new start. Ishi, the last known member of the Yahi people, lived alone in the hills for 44 years. In 1911, he walked into Oroville, California, at about age 50, carrying the language and stories of a world almost gone. Formerly enslaved people gather in Washington, District of Columbia, in 1916 beside a pastor born free. Their near 100 years link living memory from slavery to freedom. Smoke rises over a London street after a V-1 pilotless aircraft fell in July 1944. Its loud buzz from the pulse jet often gave a few seconds of warning before silence and a fall. An employee cleans wooden stairs in a government building in Washington, District of Columbia, in 1941. Service workers kept federal offices running during the World War II buildup, yet they were rarely seen. Women in Port Said receive uniforms and rifles to join local resistance during the Suez Crisis in 1956. Their stand turned the Canal City into a symbol of unity across Egypt. Captive Asiatic cheetahs ride on ox carts in the princely state of Hyderabad during the days of British India. These swift cats were trained for royal hunts, yet the species vanished from India by 1952. After liberation in 1944, Dutch and Belgian groups detained people seen as helpers of the occupiers. In the first months, many faced unofficial punishments before regular courts returned. World War I soldiers move in a line with bandaged eyes after a gas strike in 1916. Deadly clouds like chlorine and phosgene forced armies to issue masks to every unit. Spain once gave a postal worker a record sentence of 384,912 years for failing to deliver 42,768 letters. He opened mail looking for money, kept about 50,000 euros, served 14 years, and was released. After the battleship Bismarck went down in 1941, a Royal Navy crew pulled a black cat from floating debris onto HMS Cossack. They named him Oscar, the code word for man overboard, and he became a famous sea mascot. Oskar Schindler, a factory owner, used work permits to shield more than 1,000 Jewish people during World War II. His careful lists turned grave risk into a path to life for many. Former President Ulysses Grant reads a newspaper on his porch 4 days before his death in 1885. He faced a serious throat illness, yet finished his memoirs to provide for his family. Soviet soldiers serve hot meals to Berlin civilians in May 1945, days after the war in Europe ended. Field kitchens fed whole streets while the city waited for power and supplies to return. A temperature meter at the Rivoli Theater promises cool, clean air in 1925. On May 30, 1925, this New York cinema debuted modern air conditioning and changed summer moviegoing. An armored vehicle tests a flame projector near Lorena, São Paulo, during the Constitutionalist Revolution of 1932. Designers used road trials to find tactics that could clear obstacles while keeping the crew safe. Shigecho Izumi of Japan worked for 98 years on a sugarcane plantation. He kept a steady routine into old age and passed away at 105, a record-working life. East 161st Street in the Bronx appears a century apart, from early cars and small buildings to bright towers and a busy night scene. This road near Yankee Stadium has carried parades, game days, and daily city life since the 1920s. On December 24, 1948, Joseph Gutmann embraces Master Sergeant William Best, the soldier who helped free him and later adopted him. Their meeting on American soil turned rescue into family. A father and son watch Apollo 11 rise on July 16, 1969, its flame bright over the water. Moments later, 3 astronauts were on their way to the first moon landing. A young Marilyn Monroe poses on a quiet path in 1950, still years before her big break. She was turning small film roles into a future icon, one careful frame at a time. George Orwell sits at his typewriter in the 1940s, shaping clear essays and stories about power and truth. He warned that loud slogans can hide facts, a lesson that still matters today. An English writer sits at his typewriter in the 1940s, deep in thought. He later wrote Animal Farm and 1984, sharp books about how words can bend truth. An American soldier stands watch over German prisoners on Omaha Beach on June 6, 1944. Some are very young and some are older, showing how the war pulled in boys and men together. On January 28, 1986, Krista McAuliffe's parents watched from Florida as Challenger's flight ended moments after liftoff. She was set to be the first teacher in space, and that day reshaped space safety for years. Dolly Parton visits service members during Operation Desert Storm in 1991. Her songs and surprise base visits boosted spirits on long days far from home. Father James Coyle, a Catholic priest in Alabama, performed a marriage between people of different races in 1921. He was killed soon after for that act, and his case later exposed deep bias in local courts. Josef Mengele was a camp doctor at Auschwitz in World War II, known for selections and human experiments. After the war, he fled Europe and lived under false names in South America for decades. George Lincoln Rockwell, head of the American Nazi Party, attends a Nation of Islam gathering on June 25, 1961. He came to hear Malcolm X, a rare moment when sharp rivals watched each other up close. A black woman watches 2 hooded men walk a Montgomery street in 1956. That same year, the bus boycott pushed the city to end bus separation. A farmer in Vietnam works a quiet pond while the tail of a B-52 bomber sits behind him. Nature slowly covers the metal, turning a past mission into a calm field. Greenwood, known as Black Wall Street, lies in ruins after the Tulsa events of 1921. Homes and shops built by black entrepreneurs were leveled in days, a thriving district erased and later partly rebuilt. John Lewis smiles in a booking photo in 1961 after he was arrested for using a whites-only restroom in Mississippi. He later served in Congress and became a strong voice for voting rights and good trouble. A teenager sits by the ruins of his home 4 days after Hurricane Camille in Buras, Louisiana, 1969. The storm took hundreds of lives and left Gulf towns in splinters. Women soldiers of the Red Army stand in a line after capture near Neville in July 1941. Their faces show days of hard marching and the sudden turn of the first summer on the Eastern Front. Doolittle Raiders stand by a cliff shelter in China after their planes ran out of fuel in April 1942. Local people helped them hide and move across rough country. A young Donald Trump holds his first child, Donald Trump Jr., soon after birth in the late 1970s. He would later help run the family company and become a familiar face in media. A homeowner holds a rifle on her porch as a highway is set to cut through her lot in 1958. Deputies posing as reporters rushed in and took the rifle. She later won $9,000, but lost the house. Families of Mexican heritage wait to be sent out of the United States during the Great Depression. Hundreds of thousands, many United States citizens, were removed in government drives across the 1930s. At Pomona College in 1954, a freshman woman stands while the football team measures her body in a ritual called weighing. Such public checks faded as campus rules changed and student rights grew. Billie Holiday sings "Strange Fruit" at Cafe Society, New York's first racially integrated nightclub, in 1939. The quiet song stunned the room and pushed a new talk about human rights. A Japanese soldier walks across the flattened city after the Hiroshima blast in September 1945. The wide, empty plain shows how one device reshaped a landscape in seconds. United States Marine sniper Carlos Hathcock crawled for 3 days across 2,000 meters of open ground toward an enemy command post in the Vietnam War. He finished the mission with one careful shot and slipped away unseen, a feat still studied for patience and skill. Fidel Castro and Malcolm X meet at the Hotel Teresa in Harlem in September 1960 during Castro's visit to the United Nations. Castro chose Harlem after a hotel dispute, and the talk linked Cuba's new path with black voices in America. Children eat before school at a free breakfast run by the Black Panther Party in Harlem, spring 1969. The program fed tens of thousands nationwide and pushed cities to add school breakfasts. In 1948, a rhesus monkey named Albert rode a V-2 rocket in a high-altitude test in New Mexico. He did not survive the flight, but the data helped lead to later animal and human space missions. Danish resistance fighters stop and disarm German troops on a Copenhagen street in 1945. Days later, the city celebrated the end of 5 years of occupation. Two brothers, Lewis and Temple Abernathy, rode across America on horseback in 1910 with no adults, from Oklahoma to Manhattan. They went home by car while the horses rode a train, and in 1913 they crossed the country again on a motorcycle. Carrie Kirk, age 101 and once enslaved, takes a literacy class in Cleveland in 1938. A pencil and a quiet desk mark a late start that became a proud skill. Marilyn Monroe sings at the Hollywood Bowl in 1953 at a benefit for St. Jude Hospital. Her bright smile and stage charm helped raise money for patient care. In 1976, champion swimmer Shavarsh Karapetyan dived again and again to pull people from a sunken bus in a lake. He saved 20 lives and paid with injuries that ended his career, a hero far from the podium. Ethnic Germans in Prague wait on Strassmeyer Square in 1945 to be sent to post-war Germany. Millions were moved across Central Europe as borders and homes changed. A weary soldier stands in a waterlogged trench shelter on the Western Front around 1917. Weeks of rain often turned the lines into ponds, causing trench foot and bitter cold nights. The Manhattan Bridge rises between brick canyons, shown in 1908 as a new steel arch, and today as a city icon. Built in 7 years, it carries cars, trains, bikes, and a famous view framed by cobbled streets in Dumbo. Judy Garland meets a crowd of Little Toto hopefuls while testing for The Wizard of Oz in 1939. The part went to a Cairn Terrier named Terry, a dog who earned more than many actors. Johnny Clem, a young drummer boy, stood his ground at the Battle of Chickamauga in 1863. He fired his musket at a charging officer and became the youngest non-commissioned officer in United States Army history. Heinrich Himmler stands with his 12-year-old daughter Gudrun in 1941, with Reinhard Heydrich and Karl Wolff nearby. She later kept family records and spoke in his defense for years. On May 24, 1991, an El Al Boeing 747 carried 1,122 people from Ethiopia, a world record for a commercial jet. Several babies were born during the flights of this rescue airlift. World War II airmen catch sleep in theater seats between long missions. Crews often flew all night, then napped in gear so they could launch again fast. An African-American man with dwarfism poses in formal dress around 1863. Studio portraits like this showed pride and status during a time of great change in the United States. In 1926, Henry Ford set a 5-day, 8-hour workweek for his factory workers. Higher pay and shorter hours raised output and helped make weekends a norm. Frank Sinatra greets young Liza Minnelli while Judy Garland looks on in 1958. He was the voice of mid-century pop, she was a movie icon, and the girl would grow into a Broadway and film star. 3 generations of stage power meet in one quiet moment. Ronnie Bridgman, later known as Kwame Ajamu, hears a judge clear his name in Ohio in 2014 after decades in prison. The case collapsed when the key witness said his childhood story was not true. It stands as one of the longest-known wrongful convictions in the United States. A brave child called the police in 1987 to protect his mother. Officers arrive and take the father away while the child points them to the scene. The photo shows how one call can change a home. 2 Westminster schoolboys in top hats walk beside a council worker in a full anti-gas suit on February 5, 1938. Britain held civil defense classes and mask drills as tensions rose in Europe before World War II. The suit was used to test gear and train staff to guide people during alerts. An early studio in Cando, North Dakota, 1902, shows a photographer posing a man dressed as an old lady. Studios often made playful portraits like this, not only formal family shots. A hand-lettered sign reads, $1 must be paid on all orders at time of setting. A small look at how the business worked. Michelin stages a promotion at the Mikhailovsky Manege in St. Petersburg in 1907. Performers wear bibendum suits of stacked tires, the friendly mascot first drawn in 1898. The lively display shows how early car culture reached Russia before the First World War. The Great Hanshin earthquake struck the Kobe area at 5:46 in the morning on January 17, 1995, and measured about 6.9. Sections of the Hanshin Expressway tipped over, crushing lanes below and blocking rescue routes. German troops pull a rail plow to rip up tracks while leaving Soviet territory in 1944. The heavy blade, called a rail wolf, tore ties and bent steel so trains could not run. Wrecked lines slowed pursuers and cut supply routes. Soviet engineers built a floating bridge across the Dnieper northeast of Kiev in October and November 1943. Smoke screens cover the river while troops and gear move over the water. Days later, Kiev was taken back, a key step on the road west. Hundreds of fishermen worked the frozen Ural River in 1893, cutting holes and pushing long poles through the ice. Teams pulled nets under the surface to sweep fish toward the openings. This river once fed a famous trade in sturgeon and caviar across the empire. Italian film star Gina Lollobrigida greets Yuri Gagarin in 1961 during his world tour. Months earlier, he became the first human in space on Vostok 1. Their meeting shows how science and cinema drew huge crowds together. A man works in a field while thick smoke rises from a burning oil plant in Serbia, 1999. During the conflict, fuel sites burned and sent dark clouds across towns and farms. Everyday life carried on beside a sudden crisis. Soviet soldiers moved through the streets of Lviv in 1944 during the Lviv-Sandomierz offensive. Tanks and infantry fight block by block to take key crossroads. The city changed hands many times before the front moved west. The Sedan test in the Nevada desert on July 6, 1962, created a crater about 100 meters deep and 390 meters wide. It was part of a plan to see if peaceful nuclear shots could dig canals and mines, moving millions of tons of soil. The first Daimler List fire engine stands outside the Prechistenka Fire Depot in Moscow, 1908. This motor vehicle replaced horse teams, bringing a tall ladder and a pump to fires much faster. It marked the start of modern city fire service in Russia. Woodrow Wilson, the 28th President of the United States, smiles in a rare candid from the 1910s. His uneven teeth reflect everyday dental care of the era, before modern fillings and whitening. He would enter the White House in 1913 and lead the nation through World War I. HMS Achilles, a Royal Navy Leander-class frigate, sits in dry dock with its bow crushed after a collision with the Greek tanker Olympic Alliance in 1975. The crew brought her home under escort, and shipyard teams rebuilt the front section. A Romanian civilian takes aim with a PSL rifle in Bucharest on December 24, 1989, as people rose against the government. Armored vehicles and street clashes marked the final days of the regime. Within days, the leader fell, and the country began a new era. Empress Elizabeth of Austria, known as Sisi, walks in Geneva with her lady-in-waiting in 1898. The moment was caught without notice. Minutes later, she was attacked and died the same day, a shock across Europe. Sophia Loren is fitted for a shimmering gown by Italian designer Emilio Schuberth in 1955. Schuberth was called the tailor of the stars in Rome and dressed many film icons. The bold metal look matched Italy's post-war fashion boom and Loren's fast rise on screen. Berliners rest on a street of ruins in 1945, weeks after the city fell. More than half the homes were damaged or lost, and daily life moved among broken walls and dust. Russian signposts marked the new order as cleanup crews began the long rebuild. Millicent Fenwick, a former Vogue editor turned New Jersey congresswoman, calmly smokes a pipe during an ethics hearing in 1978. Her plain talk and sharp wit inspired the Doonesbury character Lacey Davenport. She became a national symbol of clean politics and old-school manners. UDA members hold a street barricade on Shankill Road, Belfast, in 1972 during the Northern Ireland conflict. Loyalist groups set up no-go zones and screened traffic as tensions rose. The Army ended most barricades later that year in Operation Motorman. Philippe Petit walked a cable between the towers of Notre Dame in June 1971. He planned it in secret and crossed back and forth as crowds watched from the square. The feat launched his famous later walks on the Sydney Harbor Bridge and the World Trade Center. Excavation on Red Square during construction of the permanent Lenin Mausoleum, 1929 to 1930. Designed by architect Alexei Shchusev, the granite and labradorite monument replaced the temporary wooden mausoleum from 1924. Hitler visited Paris at dawn on June 23, 1940, posing near the Eiffel Tower with architect Albert Speer and sculptor Arno Breker. He toured landmarks for just a few hours before returning to Germany, calling it the dream of my life. Early post-war air bridge flight from San Juan to New York in 1946. Surplus military transports, often C-46 or DC-4, used canvas web seats to keep fares low and move many passengers safely. Grand Central Terminal nearing completion in 1913 after a decade of work that began in 1903. Its breakthrough was an all-electric, two-level yard that buried the tracks and unlocked Midtown's air rights, fueling a new skyline of hotels and offices. At a Texas intake station around 1956, Bracero farm workers were sprayed with disinfectants, often DDT, as part of mandatory health processing. These chemical spraydowns later drew criticism and lawsuits over safety and dignity. In Soest on May 10, 1945, German troops lined up to surrender their arms. Piles of rifles grew as the line moved. 2 days earlier, the war in Europe had ended with unconditional capitulation, triggering mass disarmament sites like this across Germany. Victorian bathing machines lined the sands of Kent in 1890, wooden huts on wheels hauled by horses to give swimmers privacy. You stepped in on shore, changed, then the machine was rolled into the shallows. A door or canvas flaps opened so you could slip straight into the sea. A one-room Florida school in the 1870s where children of many ages learned together by lantern light and slate. Terms were short and shifted with planting and harvest, so lessons had to be fast, practical, and memorized. Willy Brandt reads the issue that named him Times Man of the Year for 1970, a nod to his bold, Ostpolitik opening to the east. That same year, he knelt at the Warsaw Ghetto Memorial, a spontaneous gesture that reshaped Germany's image abroad. A beauty contest in Communist Hungary, 1985, a rare event under a system that once banned such shows. Thousands applied, TV ratings soared, and Western sponsors appeared, signaling a softer cultural line. Comstock Mine, Virginia City, Nevada, 1867 to 1868. Miners and ore skips rise on cage hoists in Timothy O'Sullivan's gritty view, underground to surface. The Comstock lode was America's first major silver strike, minting fortunes that built nearby San Francisco and rewired finance in the West. East Prussian families pack wagons and even the tram tracks as they hurry west in August 1914, escaping the sudden Russian advance. Within days, hundreds of thousands joined this Ostpreußen flight, the largest civilian exodus the German Empire had seen to that point. Geronimo and fellow Chiricahua Apache sit beside a rail car in 1886. He's front row, third from the right, soon after his final surrender to General Nelson Miles. The U.S. Army labeled the entire group prisoners of war and sent them by train to distant forts in Florida and Alabama. Paris, June 27, 1988. A suburban train with a brake fault slammed into a packed departure train at Gare de Lyon. 56 people lost their lives, and about 60 were injured after a chain of human errors and failed safety steps. Edith Piaf sits with French prisoners in Germany in 1944, moments after a morale-boosting concert. She secured permission to take ID-style photos with the men. Those images later helped create paperwork that eased many returns home. On the Enfidaville Road in Tunisia, 1943, a British 8th Army sergeant scans the hills while a stark sign warns, "Unsafe 1 mile ahead." Enfidaville marked one of the last defensive lines in the North African campaign before final Axis surrender that spring. Berlin, May 1945. The Soviet military administration opens rail cars and hands out free potatoes to civilians in a shattered city. Potatoes became emergency currency, easy to store, plant, and feed families while public kitchens restarted. Shot in 1955 by trailblazing photojournalist Alex Rivera, this calm scene shows a mother and baby seated behind the "For Colored Patrons Only" divider on a southern bus. That small placard marked a legal line riders could not cross. Months before the Montgomery bus boycott sparked a nationwide push for equal access. In 1967, Daphne Maxwell became Northwestern University's first African-American homecoming queen, after her roommate submitted this candid photo to nominate her. She later found national fame as Aunt Viv on The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, but this moment marked her first historic crown. 19-year-old Cassius Clay, soon to be Muhammad Ali, catches his breath in a 1961 locker room, already glowing with that future champion confidence. Fresh off his 1960 Olympic gold, he was racing through the pro ranks with dazzling speed and talk that rewrote how a fighter promoted himself.